Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast brought to you by Electric Light and Power Magazine. Today's event, Leveraging Intelligent Infrastructure to Achieve Your Smart City Vision, is being sponsored by Leidos Engineering. My name is Rod Walton. I'm Senior Editor for Electric Light and Power Magazine, and I'll be your moderator for today's webcast. Before we begin, I need to cover a few housekeeping items with you. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets for you to use. They're pretty self-explanatory, but I do want to point out the question and answer tab. If you have any questions for our speakers during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget and submit your question. Our speakers will answer questions after they completed their presentation, but you can type those questions in at any time during the webcast. You may expand the slide area by clicking on the maximize icon on the top right of the slide area or by dragging the bottom right corner to enlarge. In fact, you can expand and reposition many of your components on your screen, so please feel free to arrange them any way you like to give you the optimal webcast viewing experience. If you have any technical difficulty during the webcast, please click on the Help widget. It has a question mark icon and addresses common technical issues. If you still need assistance, just type your issue into the Q&A widget, and a member of our webcast support team will work with you to correct the problem. For your convenience, this presentation will be available on demand within 24 hours of this live event. A reminder email message will be sent to all registrants with a link to the archive. It will also be accessible from the magazine's homepage at www.elp.com. So if you want to go back and view all or part of it later, or you want to encourage your coworkers to view it, it'll be available for 1 year. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today's speakers, Brandon Freeman and Steve Snyder of Leidos Engineering. Brandon is a solutions architect for Leidos Engineering, where he oversees the development of water, energy, and smart infrastructure initiatives, leveraging his background in machine-to-machine communication and the Internet of Things technology. Steve Snyder is tasked with, among other things, leveraging and combining Leidos energy, health, and national security technologies into new business models that must meet complex new business requirements. He has an extensive background in utility operations, having spent nearly 2 decades with Constellation Energy, Baltimore Gas and Electric. I'd now like to turn the program over to Brandon.
Thanks, Rod. Looks like we have a mix of folks from different professional areas joining the conversation. We have some city leadership, several folks from the utility space, and service providers, and I'd like to thank you all for your time today. I know that many of you joined us for the Smart Cities Week in Washington, D.C. last month, and there was a rather large announcement there that the White House has funded $160 million to help accelerate smart cities adoption here in the U.S. And this is just another sign that while the market is still early for smart cities, it's set to grow as cities are focusing on investing in smarter infrastructure to meet the needs that are coming up in the next 5 to 10 years. On the agenda for our call today, we'll talk about the basics of a smart city as well as how to more intelligently leverage this intelligent infrastructure to achieve your smart city's vision. We'll first talk about the elements that comprise a smart city, as well as why cities are deciding that now is the time to embark on these types of initiatives. We'll next talk about the process behind developing a smart city's master plan. And then finally, I'll hand things over to Steve, who will spend the bulk of our time today focusing on developing intelligent architecture to form the basis of your smart city's vision. To give you some context around the perspective that we take here at Leidos, this is a quick overview of our organization. We have a group of practices across the smart city space, as you see here, and from the different sectors, we've pulled experts in various groups together to form a holistic approach bringing a smart city's vision. Now, diving into the details of our presentation, before we talk about what a smart city is first to understand the benefits of a smart city initiative and why now is the time to begin one. There are 3 main trends driving cities into taking a different approach to how they invest. First, the city population growth is increasing as people migrate from suburban areas to urban centers. The city's infrastructure needs are increasing, waste increase, and in general, there's a need to address the needs of this population through increased infrastructure. Now, this is at odds a bit with the fact that a lot of infrastructure within cities are aging. A lot of infrastructure has been there for the last 20, 30 years, and there's a need to both upgrade infrastructure with new types of technologies, but you want to make sure that you can keep the infrastructure that you have in place today there as long as possible. And so there's this need to integrate both aging infrastructure with the new technologies that are coming into play. And finally, as competition at the local level between cities intensifies, making your city more livable and more friendly to out-of-town visitors is critical to building the brand of your city. And those are the three major drivers driving the Smart Cities initiatives today. Now we've talked a little bit about why embark upon a Smart Cities project. Let's talk a little bit about what that project consists of. And at a very high level, there's really 4 key elements of a Smart Cities initiative. And the first is vision, and this is really where any Smart Cities initiative really needs to start. The vision is a common alignment amongst all of your stakeholders, and those can be employees, public, other members of the community, to understand what the needs of your city are today, as well as what they will be in the next coming decades. Where a Smart Cities vision ends is with the connected community, and this is really where a lot of the value lies. Connected community is really 2 things. It's an engaged employee base within the city and an engaged public in a 2-way conversation that Smart Cities initiative can really facilitate. And in between, we have intelligent infrastructure and intelligent integration. And what this really is the key to a smart city. This is where you bridge that physical and digital domain, take the data coming from your smart cities infrastructure, and build useful applications for users. So in looking at what a smart city is, it's also important to understand the process of going about implementing smart cities implementation. And there's really 5 key areas here that we've discussed. The first is feasibility, and this is a critical phase that you need to look at when taking on a smart city initiative. This is the phase where you bring together all the stakeholders that we mentioned previously to help define what the goals of a smart cities project look like. The second phase, which is a very interesting one, is financing. And a nice thing about a Smart Cities initiative is that when you're bringing stakeholders together across different departments at the regional and state level, this opens up new financing opportunities to help you fund a Smart Cities initiative. So there are very interesting things in terms of regional revenue streams, commercial revenue streams that you can bring in to help fund these types of projects. Now in the design phase, this is a critical phase as well. The design phase is involved not only in creating a plan for the Smart Cities initiative in and of itself, but it's also critical to ensure that a Smart Cities project is incorporated into the master plan of the city. Because as departments go about their procurement in future years, it's important that they have a plan to look back on to make sure that their goals are in line with the broader goals of the Smart Cities plan. Looking at installation, this is another key area here. Typical procurement today is at the departmental level, and most folks working on installation at that level are very familiar with the systems at a departmental level. However, when you look at a Smart Cities implementation, it's really a system across all of the departments within a city and even a region. And it's very important that you have a system-level integrator who understands the system across all of these different areas and how to bring them together. Finally, when looking at sustainment, it's very important to both have a training program and a marketing program to engage both employees and the community so that they're aware of and know how to take advantage of the value that you're creating. Now, in addition to the process of going about a Smart Cities implementation, there are many other aspects outside of just the technical requirements that you take into consideration. Technical requirements are where many folks focus on. However, there are economic requirements that we've talked about in terms of how and when do I want to make investments in different areas of the initiative. Operational sustainment, where I know many of you can think of projects that have started off very successfully for 1 or 2 years and then fade and disappear over future years because of a lack of a plan up front for operational sustainment. Security here is very important, and when we talk security, we mean both physical security and cybersecurity. And this is critical because the more things you connect in terms of your infrastructure, the more data that becomes available, the more people are going to try and gain access to that data through different routes. And so it's very critical that you have a security plan in place from the start to grow as your smart cities infrastructure expands. Regulatory is not just a requirements driver, but as we mentioned, it's also an opportunity to engage other partners to help offset costs. And finally, community outreach, that last critical piece, is critical to make sure that the public is aware of and takes advantage of the work you're doing on their behalf. Now, in diving down into the 4 elements of a smart city that we showed earlier, we mentioned vision and policy is really the foundation of smart cities system. This next level, intelligent infrastructure, is where we're going to spend the bulk of the time on today. Our next webcast is going to focus on intelligent integration, and finally we'll wrap up talking a little bit about connected community and how these other 3 pieces provide that value to different members of. But in looking at intelligent integration a little bit more closely, this is really where the data is generated. So this is that legacy infrastructure as well as new infrastructure that you may be procuring in the future, and what types of data can be made available through that infrastructure. Intelligent integration is that bridge of the physical and digital divide, where you're extracting the data from this infrastructure and creating useful applications for both employees of the city and the public. And finally, a connected community is that process of engaging both of those groups with these applications in order to create a two-way conversation and add incremental. And so what I'll do now is hand it over to Steve, who's going to give an example of one of our intelligent infrastructure cases and exactly how you bring these different formats to play with smart. Steve?
Great. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you very much. The slides shown right now and the last few slides that Brandon went over are really how the smart city connected community comes together. And the slide shown is really the end state with regards to working from policy and vision through infrastructure up to the digital integration and really into that connected community, lifting it into a higher realm. What I wanted to talk about today was really diving down into the intelligent infrastructure, the physical piece about that. So what I wanted to do was take some time, go over what are the trends in that intelligent infrastructure, and actually take you through 3 vignettes or case studies that we worked with to drive home some of the considerations that a city contemplating a smart city environment may wish to think about. So the slide shown here, and I'm going to take an example on the electrical energy piece. Maybe about 10, 15 years ago when people were looking at electricity, the predominant thought was, hey, let's look at energy efficiency. Let's use less and change some equipment. That was changing lighting, changing insulation, maybe adjusting your operations so you use less power at night setbacks and things along those lines. And that worked very well. But over the last decade or so, there's been a convergence of energy systems that have been coming together. Energy systems such as you have your utilities, your natural gas, your electricity, but now there are renewable energies out there, energy storage, combined heat and power, using waste as an asset, even looking at converging third-party monies and bringing that into the equation. And what used to be a very siloed electrical energy piece is now becoming a more holistic, larger energy play, the convergence of energy systems. Now, what's been happening is you've heard of the Internet of Things, big data, the cloud. There are now sensors, data, multi-gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes worth of data that are coming in that now allow us to take that and run that through the higher level technology so that we now have dynamic control. We can take the information, look at it, get to situational awareness, and do actionable intelligence based upon what we see. We can start adjusting and working in real-time pricing of community incentives. So now what's happening in that electrical piece, which is a small part of the physical infrastructure, you have that evolution of silo to convergence to be able to map that into the digital realm and working through intelligent integration. And that really then starts providing a high level of value solution that can be applied to raising our smart city to a connected community. Now, when Brandon was talking, there was a 4-step process that went from vision all the way up to connected community. Another way of really looking at that is where the physical intelligent infrastructure, where the digital realm or the intelligent integration, and where the vision all overlap strongly. That is where the connected community, the smart cities play really is. So what I wanted to do now was take these 3 case studies and show how they all fit into the vision, the physical, the digital, and how they all superimpose themselves to be able to drive toward that connected community vision. So the first case I wanted to chat about was an industrial park that was being built from the ground level, a greenfields industrial park that was focused around an economic development play. And if you recall, the genesis from that diagram that Brandon showed, the genesis of the smart city was really a very strong vision. And that vision is exceptionally critical toward implementing a multi-generational smart cities play. And as we know, smart cities is about setting ourselves up for the future. So in this instance, the mayor actually had 6 tenets or visions around the smart grid industrial park that was being put together. The first is the mayor wanted to have this industrial park be a strong economic development attraction, to be able to bring in more jobs, more revenue, and to be able to improve the business climate for the city. The mayor also realized that it's wise not to be able to put all your infrastructure and your capital in up front, but have a solution that is scalable and modular that can be built and expanded based upon the ebb and flow of the city operations and influx of new customers and new businesses. Waste. Many times waste is considered a liability. I have to pump it away. I take it to a landfill. There's a tipping fee associated. So how about reconverting that liability into an energy asset so that you can use that to be able to lower cost and improve your sustainability? The vision also was to be able to create a park that had a 20% total energy reduction as compared to if this industrial park would have been built in the traditional siloed city manner, if you will. There was also an important aspect that the city does not necessarily have unlimited funds and unlimited resources. So being able to take the smart city solution and minimize the city's and the tenant's capital requirements and be able to work with potentially third-party financiers as a P3 environment or a public-private partnership. And then also working within the existing tariffs and regulations. Why is that important? If you can work within existing regulations, you can avoid the unnecessary length of time to be able to go out and change politicians and regulatory constructs. It's very intensive. If you can work within the existing tariff structure, you improve your environment for success to be able to launch your smart city. So with those visions, those visions really set up how the smart city solution was derived. So in this solution, one of the important things was to be able to go out and look at all the stakeholders that potentially had stake into the city solution, the civic leaders, the potential property owners, the master developers, the financiers, the citizens, the ability to make it a win-win for the local waste companies, energy storage, local companies looking to expand. Having the vision is very important, but also vitally important is ensuring that your stakeholders are consistently aligned with that vision. Crystalline vision is important. That stakeholder alignment is a key success factor with regards to moving your smart city into that connected community. As Brandon had mentioned, one of the architectures was the sustainable operation, and much of that sustainable operation architecture is ensuring your stakeholders are in alignment and support where you are going. Now, the mayor had a vision of being able to use waste as an energy asset. But in addition to that, there was a underlying vision of let's go ahead, and we know that the electric utilities, the gas utilities, and the waste infrastructure exist. How can we best use that and integrate that into the mayor's vision so that we could use the community waste to provide an energy fuel? We could also go out and use campus waste or waste which was produced by the industrial customers, put that into an energy flow, figure out how best to integrate that into the utilities so it's a win-win-win for the entire community. In this instance, looking at the regulatory architecture and figuring out with the technologies, which technologies best fit to be able to meet that goal was a prime most consideration for driving this concept forward. Now, everyone out there on the phone call does not have unlimited resources. We know that. So being able to put a smart city solution together that is scalable and modular is very important. You don't want to put all your capital in the ground when you can use it and distribute it over time and use it much more effectively. So the consideration in this smart cities concept was, hey, let's go ahead and start with the waste to energy component. We know that the waste is out there. There's community waste. There's waste that can come from the industrials. Let's go ahead and initially convert that to an energy source and be able to supply that to the industrial customers. Then as the park grows and the economic development is improving and as new technologies come along, we can start folding in renewable energies to drive sustainability. We can add energy storage. We can use, in addition to waste, not only to create an energy fuel, but perhaps leverage that so it can become a transportation fuel. You can use biomass, connect to the grid. How can you make this industrial park so that it's a win for the utilities, a win for the city, a win for the government, and a win for the environment? And being able to put that into a modular, scalable action was a consideration that has merit over time, particularly, again, since a smart cities play is a multi-generational, long-time play. As I also mentioned, the mayor had a vision of being able to take this industrial park and use it as an economic development driver. An important way to be able to go out and do that was, can I provide a blended energy? When I say blended energy, that's electricity, thermal heat, cooling heat, different forms of energy, blend that together, and can that be less expensive than we would normally get it off of the traditional solution? So in this instance, looking at those architectures, which you had the technical architecture, the economic architecture, the regulatory architecture, we were able to work with the city to be able to put a construct together by looking at the tariffs, the feed-in tariffs, the incentives and grants, and be able to tie that together so that this smart cities installation has the potential to be able to provide 20% or greater energy reduction, which is a very, very good economic development play. So again, the takeaway from that is, in that first vignette, was having that crystalline vision and using that to drive your entire feasibility, life cycle analysis, and the architectures, how they put it together, is very vital. The second play or example I wanted to chat about was on the physical arena. And this one is tied together with regards to a greenhouse. The bottom line out of this entire concept was, how can I improve my economic return for my operation? Now, in this instance, obviously, plants grow off of sunlight. In this particular application, there was the ability to have relatively inexpensive natural gas, and there was waste, again, that was produced by growing crops. So the concept behind that is, let's go ahead and leverage the natural gas and the existing waste that exists, put that into a standard everyday combined heat and power unit, be able to produce power less expensively than you can buy it off the grid, use that power to run nighttime lights to improve crop growth, and then also take the carbon dioxide, which normally would have been going out to the air as a greenhouse gas, recycle that, put that into the self-contained environment, use that CO2 and also the ability to have humidity control from the engine, run that in, and that gives you more crops, which again goes to a strong economic return. So this is a nice example of where you went and you looked what was available, and you figured out, how can we take that physical nature, put it together, and run it together in a convergence in a holistic manner so that we can go and get a higher crop yield, which was the bottom line. So that was a nice look at an example of how the physical system can improve your operation. The last piece which I wanted to chat with quickly was what a concept which is going on in the northeast of the United States. And this vignette will talk about how we take the physical infrastructure and overlay it on top of the digital realm, or the intelligent integration, to be able to drive and create benefit for the local community or the smart city. So the Northeast is interesting because there are two major challenges that are going around in that part of the country. The first one is energy costs are rising. The generation capacity and transmission costs are significantly increasing. That's part of the cost of importing power off the transmission line. In some parts of the country, in the next 2 to 3 years, that would have been potentially a 6 times increase, which is a significant cost impact to everyone who lives within the city. The second challenge, which is up there, is a resiliency play. Superstorm Sandy came through a couple years ago. They had ice storms. Potentially, Hurricane Joaquin is looking to barrel right into either the Mid-Atlantic or the Northeast. Resiliency challenges play a significant part. And customers, the expectations in those particular, in that part of the country are there, and they're looking to the city governments, the municipals, the regulation makers. How can we address this? And oftentimes, cost and resiliency, they can be diametrically opposed. So the real challenge is now, how can we look at what we have and be able to address this so it improves the quality of life and the ability to go in and tie that together? So in this instance, the way that prices are set in that part of the country is for 2016, they look to 2015 and they say, okay, for the peak times of the electrical system, how much power does your city use? And it sets that in stone, and then that is basically used to set your rates for 2016. So the real art then is there a way that we can reduce our ability to reduce our rates? So there are two ways we can do that. One is we can go on the right-hand side, and you see there's a digital piece in there. There's a lot of information that comes off of the network, the electrical system, that says this is how my system is working. If you can then go in and use that information to be able to proactively predict when the rates are going to be high, you can then say, okay, customers, hey, let's throttle back our load. Or on the other side, maybe we can inject some excess self-generated power onto the system, be able to reduce the input that comes from the electrical system. So a nice way to be able to do that, again, is use a small physical generator, a natural gas generator, connect that directly to the utility system, and then when you know from that digital analysis exactly when to turn it on, you fire that generator up for maybe 100 hours a year, and you don't run it the rest of the time. And having that laser-like precision of knowing when to turn it on, when to operate it, and how to keep your O&M costs down by minimizing your operations and fuel usage, you can get a substantial amount of energy cost reduction by tying those generators in. It works all across those items on the bottom: synchronous reserve, cost control, peak management, from that point. So a nice way to be able to go out and reduce your power. Now, I wanted to take a step out from this vignette for a second and talk about some high-level smart city economics. Smart cities, the play of investing into your city and doing the intelligent infrastructure, the intelligent integration, and going to the connected community is a very, very long-term, can be multi-generational. It sets you up for a long time for the future. So it is a long view. So in this chart which I've shown up, I'll make up a town's name. Let's say Schneiderville spends $50 million a year on electricity that you bring in from the electrical system. From being able to apply those electrical generators, if I could reduce my energy import down, or the cost for that energy for my city down to, let's put a number, $38 million, there's a $12 million savings out there. Just like in some people's individual stock portfolios, you reinvest your dividends, a consideration for a city who's looking at a smart city's goal and mission is to be able to take that savings and actually reinvest that into your infrastructure, reinvest into your sensors, your analytics, your data repository, reinvest it into perhaps resiliency and reliability improvements. Take the money and reinvest it to be able to drive you toward your long-term vision. So what do I mean by that? So going back to the Northeast here, we know that resiliency was one of the two big major issues up there. Resiliency is important for a city because when you have power, you can provide essential services. You can lessen the impact of severe weather events. You are taking your ability to emergency planning, and you could tie that in and work with the existing local infrastructure and utilities to be able to improve that. Of course, when you have higher reliability, you have higher customer satisfaction, and also higher reliability is nice because it actually can drive and spur economic development in your community. So, what's a way to do that? Well, number one is, if you recall, there was some savings. So if you can take some of that savings and reinvest that potentially into, let's say, a microgrid technology, which allows utility-grade automated switching capabilities with automatic controllers and the ability to have switching occur so that you can isolate the system from the grid. And then you take the generators from the previous slide, which normally will run 100 hours, and you run them all out until power comes back and you turn them off. What that then allows you to do is erode your savings just a little bit, incorporate the resiliency play into your generator, and you have much higher value from your solution there. So again, that was a nice instance where being able to take the physical nature of the generation and the microgrid technology, and then tying that in with the intelligence from the microgrid controller, the intelligence to be able to look at the system and figure out when to run a generator for optimal economics. That plays into a nice portfolio movement going forward. So again, just taking a step, the three vignettes I went through quickly. One is the physical situation where we looked at the greenhouse, figured out what we had, how could we tie them together to get maximum synergy. We looked at the vision where there was an industrial park being built from the ground up, and having a crystalline mayor's vision allowed the smart cities intelligent infrastructure construct to be able to move and everything go in concert to take the city where it needed to go. And then the last one was a digital realm where we looked at real-time pricing signals, and we were able to use that to drive when do we operate a generator as effectively and economically as possible, derive some savings, and then use that savings to reinvest back into my city. We want to play where all three of those coincide to drive toward that connected community. So a couple key takeaways I wanted to throw out here. One is that every city has physical infrastructure in it. You have the utilities, you got the electric, you have the water, you have the waste, you have the sensors, you have the telecom, the roadways. Those infrastructures exist. An intelligent smart city is going to require taking that physical infrastructure, driving intelligence into it, and looking at it as a whole system instead of disaggregate silos. The second piece is that economic value is very important when looking at your smart cities approach. If it doesn't make sense economically, you may want to go back and re-wiggle your approach, because if the money doesn't make sense, you may be dealing with a science project instead of a viable, long-term play. You need to look at all of your systems, know what you have, figure out what are the pros and cons and strengths of each of those, tie them all together to be able to maximize the usefulness of the system or the holistic play. That holistic play will have puts, takes, and trades. So as you go through and run through that feasibility process and the process going from vision to the physical realm to the digital realm to the connected community, and then running through the 6 architectures, there's going to be puts and takes and trades associated with that. Realize that going in front, but as long as you know what your long-term vision is, those puts and takes and trades, as long as you're going toward that vision, are okay. And then finally, stakeholder alignment is key to the success. You can have a great vision, but if you have a fractioned stakeholder group, that can significantly challenge your ability to have successful smart city integration. So having that front-end work of having the stakeholder alignment and tying that all in and ensuring there is consistent head nodding all the way through is quite important. So again, Brandon and I, we wanted to queue up the high-level smart cities approach, and then also queue up working on that, call it the foundation for the physical infrastructure, and how that, leading into what we'll talk about in the next webcast with intelligent integration, can lift the city up to a connected community play from that point. So Rod, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Steve and Brandon. That was an insightful, well-done presentation looking at how smart city vision can be achieved, integrated with current infrastructure, and using real-world examples. I want to let everybody know that today's webcast is the first in a two-part series on smart cities that they're doing. The second webcast, Connecting the Physical and Digital Domains, Intelligent Integration for a Smart City, will be presented 2 weeks from today on October 15th. I strongly urge you to attend this second session as well. The October 15th webcast explores how a smart city can modernize its infrastructure by connecting the physical and digital domains of its new and legacy assets. And in that session, Steve and Brandon will discuss approaches to leverage multiple devices and data streams to facilitate the highest return on investment. It is now time to move on to the question and answer portion of this presentation. If you haven't already done so, please enter your questions by clicking on the Q&A widget and typing it in, and we'll respond to as many questions as time allows. Brandon, it's all yours now.
Thanks, Rod. I appreciate it. And it looks like we have a couple of questions already, but as you mentioned, please feel free to add any that you've had throughout the conversation using the widget. We'll start off with our first question, and Steve and I will take turns answering them as appropriate. First question, in terms of scope of interest, does smart city in your experience relate exclusively or solely to service digitization in the public sector, or does smart city scale to include the broader private sector and its digitization efforts? And this is a great question. I think if you recall back to the framework that we talked about with smart cities, especially in terms of revenue, this is one of the opportunities with smart cities projects is the ability to engage across that public-private divide, as Steve alluded to in some of the case examples we used today. There's a couple of others that come to mind. In several instances, we're working with regions across the world where there's either a city, a utility, or in some case even a telecom service provider that's looking to build out infrastructure across a specific territory. And what we're doing is we're actually working with them to offset the cost of this communications infrastructure by sharing the bandwidth with folks from the different parts of that region. So as an example, we're working with a utility who's setting up a territory-wide SCADA network upgrade, and we're actually working with them to be able to offer a portion of that bandwidth to a local carrier and to the city for some of their smart cities needs. And this is just an example of that bridge where you actually have, and actually this is what we'll talk about in more detail in the next webinar with the intelligent integration piece, but it's really sharing that infrastructure to bring back data from different users and really completely different segments, but being able to share that cost so that everyone can do so more effectively and actually have a broader reach. Steve, do you have any thoughts on this one as well?
Sure, yeah, thank you, Brandon. So I would say that the smart city, it's a good consideration to have your key industrial and commercial stakeholders involved into the overall smart cities play. So when the question is digital servitation or to the public sector can include the private sector. The private sector is very, very important with regards to being able to put together a more effective play. If you recall the example that I was talking about, that industrial park that was being built from the ground up, the front end of that actually had a significant amount of talking to the private sector and asking what type of construct and what type of configuration and how does the money move back and forth and the power and the bills and all that. It was very important to have them tied into that and to be able to move forward, because what that then did is that they got the stakeholder, that particular set, in alignment and really drove the win-win-win situation that we were trying to architect out there. The second piece also in there is that when you say private sector, you can also look at potentially using a public-private partnership to be able to drive some of that cost to be able to put it forward. So just outside of digitization and the infrastructure play, tying that foundation together, really tying the private sector into that is pretty enabling for the overall solution. Good question.
And I see several other questions related to financing and the economics of these smart cities models. Here's another one for you, Steve. What resources are required, and how do you go about building these financial architectures?
Well, that's a really good question. So the first thing I would say is there is a lot of commonality between the solutions, but there's also a lot of uniqueness because each city is particularly unique. And some of the unique characteristics that play into that, which are very important to understand, is what is my regulation and my existing tariff structures for the utilities? How are they set up? What can I play in? What can't I play in? Because a lot of again, to make the smart city economically viable, there's a substantial amount of money that flows in there. And one of the ways that money can be infused into the solution is on the energy play. So being able to know, how can I sell the energy? Should I sell it to the utility? Should I sell it to the public? Should I sell perhaps the thermal to the commercial and the electric to the utility? How much power should I put into the utility versus behind? And all that will allow you to start iterating in. The second play, in addition, and each utility may have a unique tariff, so you have to go in and look and understand the business action around that. The second play, of course, around there is going out and potentially getting third-party monies from that. There are as the smart city concept grows and you have energy injection into it, others, Wall Street and financiers understand energy. And then as that expands, there will be potentially some funds and some financial groups out there that are willing to put into that and either get a shared savings or a power purchase agreement or some other way that you could leverage from that point. So what I would say for resources is being able to understand the existing laws, tariffs, regulations, and the financial structures around that. The second piece in there is also being able to grab a system integrator, which has a full understanding of utilities, renewable energy, energy storage, water, waste, and how that all ties together, because you want to look at that in a holistic manner. And having a really robust system integrator to be able to go in and do that will help de-silo that, look at it a holistic play, and again, let you look at everything together and figure out how do I best architect the technical and the financial piece so it gives you the economic return you're looking for.
Wonderful. Thanks, Steve. We have another great question here. How do you balance the pressure to reduce active service cost to end users versus the need for long-term investment? Or in other words, how do you plan a balance between the reinvestment of savings versus distributing that? And I think this is a great question, and this goes back to that whole concept of the smart cities process, because that needs to be a part of your broader smart cities plan before you start even putting equipment in the ground. And the reason for that is there's really two things that applications within this smart cities environment can provide. One is increase in applications and in services for your customers and for the public, but the other is efficiency as well. And so it's really a balance between those two things in terms of your implementation, where one category of things is a cost driver, where you're providing a broader set of services at an increased cost to the end customer, the end user. That other class is actually a revenue-generating tool where in typically a fairly short amount of time you can actually get a positive ROI off that. And so as part of the smart cities process, what you want to always do here is have that mix in mind in the planning stages, so that when you actually look towards implementation and design, you can make sure that you're prioritizing right applications in the right time frame in order to achieve that mix. But there's definitely an opportunity to do both, and it's really, again, critical in that planning phase that you have consensus across all the stakeholders as to what that mix needs to look like and the time frame, because it can also vary over time as well. Steve, do you have any thoughts on that? I have another one for you otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely, really quickly. So two things. One is that having a strong crystalline vision And so, for instance, so there's a mayor who wants to do something, and then laying down the expectation that a percentage of my savings will go be reinvested, and having that as part of the operational execution of the plan, and that set up from the front can address that. Secondly, in the example we chatted about, as part of the mayor's vision, that first example, there was a 20% service reduction cost at a blended rate. So going in and having that set up from the front end establishes what some of that savings would be, and then you use that as basically a drawdown for reinvestment versus keeping the cost down. So architecting that in at the front end as part of that operating modus operandi would help balance that pressure, if you will.
Great, thanks, Steve. Here's another one for you as well. Do you see smart cities being driven more from an internal city management driver or a macro external state federal regulatory driver typically, or is it a mix of both, in fact?
Well, that's a really good question. I guess a short answer, I would see that the vision being driven from the city management, and some of the external federal regulatory may be able to provide grants and subsidies. But I would see the primary driver coming from the city state, if you want to use that in quotes, versus the federal and state. So that's how I see that coming down in a long-term look.
Great, thanks. Looking next here, we have another one. In order to avoid vendor dependency, this is a good one. In order to avoid vendor dependency, particularly at the digital level and to support the integration efforts, are there data exchange standards to facilitate the integration between the components of different domains? And this is a great question, and this is something that I think everyone can agree has been a challenge for quite some time. The technology that's been developed over the last 10, 20, 30 years has been fairly siloed into the different disciplines within the smart city environment. So you have the utility environment with certain protocols, certain standards. You go over to transit, when you go over to different areas in the public works, et cetera, et cetera. There are definitely standards silos between all of these environments. And this is one of the points we'll talk about in the next webinar is how do you build a smart cities system architecture to be able to accommodate that? Because, again, the last thing you want to do is throw out your legacy infrastructure because it doesn't talk to one another. So a critical way to get around this today is that you have this concept of a data fusion layer where you're actually able to talk the talk, if you will, in each of these different areas. So you can speak the protocols and the languages in the utility space, as well as the transit space, as well as SAP, Oracle in the back office space, and be able to insert this data fusion layer that helps all those different systems talk to one another. That's really the way that you can integrate the infrastructure that you have on the ground today and the investments that you've already made. Where this is going in the future is that you'll see that there's actually standardization conversations happening across the board, and in the future, because everything's towards an IP basis and towards a cloud web services basis, this is going to be less of an issue. And so it's a matter of really looking backwards and being able to carry some of that legacy infrastructure along with you into the future, and less so of a problem that we anticipate you're going to encounter as much in the next, especially 5 years moving forward. Take a look at another. Here's another one for you, Steve. How willing do you find cities to be in reinvesting savings rather than just keep?
So again, I'll say it's across the board. So at a very high level, again, a lot of that is contingent upon what is the vision of the initial construct put together, or the sustainment plan around that. Now, that said, obviously cities will go through times when there's constraints and not constraints with the resources, and some are greater than others. So that reinvestment appetite probably will fluctuate over time. But the bottom line of that is that and again, smart cities are a relatively new concept, is having that vision together and being able to say, of this amount of savings, I reinvest this piece of it almost as a supplemental income for the city general fund or whatever. So the initial vision is that they're there, and that the reinvestment play does make sense. But I expect that truthfully to vary between each city, depending on how that is actually put in, and how the smart cities sustainment for each individual city is effective or not. And again, I think that goes back to how effective is your operational sustainment architecture that you put together.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks. We have another one here around security. It says, there's a mention of security, specifically cybersecurity. What are some of the key areas that we should be looking at with regards to this in smart cities? And this is a great question. I was actually at a transportation conference last week, and I'll give you just an interesting example. Someone from the Department of Transportation came on and showed a picture that he had pulled off of eBay, and it was a key to access some of the transit infrastructure that's pretty much standardized across the entire country, right? And this is an example of where that may not have been a problem in the past 30 years ago when this was put into the ground. Because of the internet, because of the digital world that we live in today, these types of things are commonplace. And so both cybersecurity and physical security are tremendously important. You don't want someone buying a key for $20 off the internet and going in and potentially playing havoc with infrastructure across the city. And so this is something that, while is still fairly nascent in the smart city space, is something that's becoming very important as we see more and more instances of this, both in the private side and the public side as well. This is really something that needs to be built into the architecture from the ground up. It's not something where you add a firewall, if you will, after the fact. Every layer of your smart cities architecture needs to be protected both from the physical standpoint and a cyber standpoint. And there are ways to do that. Effectively, there are different vulnerabilities or potential vulnerabilities at each level, and there are different answers for those. And the best thing to do is to look for a cybersecurity and physical security expert to help you take a look at the system you have today, the system that you're looking at in the future, and give you some ideas on ways that system. Now we have another one here. What do you see as the largest challenge to implementing a smart city solution? Steve, you want to take that one?
Sure. So three come to mind. One is that how can data mobility be best pushed down to everyone involved within the city? Data mobility meaning the ability to use your iPhone, your iPad, and be able to tie that into it and make the city a more improved place to live. The second one is a privacy issue, in the sense that as Internet of Things and as data and as the ability to draw on that data to do intelligent, actionable information comes out of it, that privacy issue is a big challenge, and wrapping that around. And then the third piece of that would be the ability to have multiple data sources come together in a common language, a common platform, a common ability to talk back and forth and be able to integrate those in so that you don't have to rip out a new system, but you could integrate and play with what you have and take that and then layer it up into a level that all that can talk together. They're the three that I see. Brandon, I don't know if you have a different three, but I'd love to hear if you agree or disagree.
No, I think those three are great, and I would largely agree with what you're saying there. We have another one here that says, what is your opinion and experience about smart cities concepts implementation in developing countries, specifically in South America. And this is a great one because smart cities is really something that's taking off across the globe, not just here in the States where we're talking to you from. South America is a very interesting market, like many other developing markets, because the business models, especially in the utility space, but also in other sectors within the smart cities environment, the business cases are very different. And I'd say you have that to contend with, along with the fact that when you talk about bringing together the physical and digital world, the digital world in developing markets is all about mobile. And so when you have these two things combined, you need to have much stronger business cases and ROI around your initiatives, as well as it needs to be very heavily friendly and dependent upon mobile devices and that mobile infrastructure that's in place. Those are really two things that smart city systems play very strongly in. When you look at what we mentioned earlier in answering one of these other questions, when you're able to look at a smart cities implementation more broadly across several different departments and several different areas, you're able to blend those together so that while some initiatives may be cost drivers, others are revenue drivers, and the two together can create a more compelling return on your investment rather than as separate initiatives. And so that's really a key thing, is the ability to, as I think Steve illustrated in his example, the ability to bring that together and to bring different revenue channels together to finance some of these activities to help them be feasible in some of these developing markets. And the second one is there's a very strong focus on mobile and ability and the ability to reach both employees and the public on their cell phones with smart cities implementations. That's a critical piece we'll again be talking about next week. But I think those two combined make these types of initiatives actually very attractive in developing markets. And again, it just depends on, it goes back to that whole process-based approach where you need to outline what your goals are, outline what your constraints, especially financial constraints are, and then develop a plan by engaging these both on the public and private side to be able to meet those conditions. Steve, do you have any thoughts on that one as well?
Yeah, I'll give my quick thoughts, and we'll probably have time for one more question after this. So I was actually chatting with a developer who's looking about doing microgrids in Africa, South America, the Caribbean, and some of the Asia-Pacific Rim. And we both wholeheartedly acknowledge that if the smart city or the microgrid play is not economically viable, it's probably something that shouldn't be chased after, at least the way that we're approaching it. So my opinion on that is that the economic play around the smart cities concept, wherever it's implemented, you can't overlook that because it has to pan out. Otherwise, again, it's just a science project, or it may be something that you opt to do on a philanthropical basis without having a money constraint around it.
Great, thanks, Steve. I think we'll have one more, and we'll see if we can squeeze one other one in. Rod, I think you'll cut us off when it's time. But what do you see as the next technology game changer in the smart city space? And one that comes to mind for me, going along the lines of the previous question we were addressing, is mobility. In a lot of cities and a lot of you'll see these airports and cities in different areas of the smart city space, a lot of folks are coming up with mobile apps as the primary means to drive that connected to community engagement. And there's a lot of innovation going on in this space. We're all used to mobile apps and how that interface works today. But there's a lot of things going on with augmented reality and other technologies where you can actually achieve the goal more efficiently, the goal being to help the public and employees more efficiently go through the things they go through every day, and that can be helping them commute more efficiently to work. It can be helping them get to their flight more quickly within an airport to help generate incremental revenue for the airport. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the mobile space, and how you facilitate that two-way conversation more easily, leveraging mobile devices, and I think that's one of the exciting things with that layer of the Smart Cities architecture. Steve, I'm sure you have something as well.
Yeah, I wanted to, two things I want to provide my perspective and then just kind of wrap up. But I actually see one of the next game changers is wearables, and that's a different form of mobility. But Google Glasses, although they're not, but it's something along those lines where you have wearable technology, and how does that integrate and that form factor, how that tied in, I think is going to be a game changer with regards to smart cities as we become a more connected society, and that connected community we talked about. Wearables and some of the stuff that's going on in the DoD as it becomes commercialized is going to come in and really start impacting how a smart city actually plays. So that was it. I also did want to just again remind everyone on the line that we are going to be having a second webcast set up to talk about the digital realm, which Brandon was talking about, called the intelligent integration, which takes all the data associated from the physical layer and how does it tie up and basically lift the city up to a connected community vision. So we'll be having that a webcast October 15th at 1 p.m. East Coast time, and we look forward for everyone joining in. And Brandon and I certainly enjoyed the hour we spent with you, and look forward to interacting with everyone on the phone call in the future.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Very good, Steve. Thank you. There were some great questions and answers that really drilled down there. And yes, remember part 2 in 2 weeks. Well, on behalf of Electric Light and Power Magazine and Penwell, I'd like to thank Steve Snyder and Brandon Freeman for leading this event, and to Leidos Engineering for sponsoring today's presentation, Leveraging Intelligent Infrastructure to Achieve Your Smart City Vision. This presentation will be archived within 24 hours and can be accessed at the homepage at www.elp.com. A reminder email message for the archive will be sent to all of you who are registered. It will include a direct link to the archived webcast. So please feel free to share that link with your coworkers and peers. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I know you're all very busy, and I very much appreciate you making time for this presentation. Look forward to sharing future webcasts with you. I'm Rod Walton with Electric Light and Power Magazine. Have a great day, everyone.